This episode of Arrays of Living does something a little different. It tells a story. And this is something new for me. I'm trying something new, and I hope it all comes together the way I have it in my mind, because it's funny how you sometimes have this thing played out in your mind and it goes differently in reality. So bear with me, because it's a story. And the story is called A Tragedy Averted. And the story is about a relationship that is established at birth and extends a lifetime. It is one of the most important of relationships, and one, for the most part, that is void of choice. This story does not start at the beginning, but it does venture into the past, about 2 years ago. It centers around a son and a mother that sometimes did not see eye to eye on subjects, and that at times led them into fights. And one night, such an event occurred. In a car, the son and mother had a massive argument about one of those non-seeing eye-to-eye subjects that happened. Now, the discussion got loud enough that the sister, who happened to be on the phone, ended up telling them in no uncertain manner to stop. And they did, because in the heat of the moment, they had actually forgotten that she was on the phone. So they stopped. And the rest of the ride occurred in complete silence. And the son stopped talking to the mother for 2 solid days. He was trying to cool down, and deep down he knew he was in the wrong. But he didn't know how to say it, because the argument had triggered something from the past. It had triggered a childhood resentment he held towards his mother for doing something that he blamed her for. Now, on the second day after the argument, the mother came into the son's room to talk to him. And instead of listening to her, he decided to ignore her completely and just continue instead to watch his TV. Now, the mother, in her wisdom, recognized the response was for her son to ignore. So the mother closed the door and exited from the room. After a few minutes, the son came down the stairs, and he was willing at that point to talk about the issue. He shared with his mother something his grandmother told him years back when he was a little boy, no more than 10 years old, and after he had gotten into trouble again at school. The words that he remembered the grandmother saying was that he was a disgrace to the family. And those words, when she said it, had cut deep. They were deep wounds for him. The significant impact on him was that his mother stood next to the grandmother and said nothing. She didn't disagree. She said nothing. And from the eyes of that little boy, she accepted those words. And her failure to defend him at that point in time, her son, validated for him what the grandmother said to be truth. And that remained with him, weathering the time past. That small episode had a lasting impact and still held weight on his mind, especially with him seeing everyone in the immediate family moving forward and accomplishing things, while he considered himself in a standstill mode in his own life. Releasing this pent-up resentment and openly telling his mother how he felt and how he saw that childhood situation brought him to tears, and brought the mother also to tears. She cried, and she explained in the midst of her crying and in the midst of her sobbing, that he was never a disgrace to her and the family. And what she shared with him about that particular time that he spoke of, which she definitely recalled because she had brought him to the grandmother for help. And she shared that at that time, she had had such grave concerns for his continual pattern to fight at school. And she knew that she had to stop that cycle. But in that very particular situation that he spoke about, she had become at a loss on how best to do just that. She knew it had to be done, but she was truly in that moment at a loss at what other things she could try, what she could do. And in that moment, so many thoughts had been running through her head that she actually never heard his grandmother say those words. She never heard. She was in her own space. She was in her own thoughts. And she gave recognition to the fact that he had come a long way from fighting. He had stopped fighting. He had come a long way from getting suspended from school, from partying and hanging around with drugs and all these dangerous elements. And she gave him validation and voiced her pride in his motivation to go back to school, hold down his job, and stay committed to both while trying to move forward in his life. She also shared with him that he should stop comparing himself to other people, to his sisters and others, and instead put the energy of that into being proud of how far he had come. See his journey, focus on his journey. She reinforced her extreme pride in him and pointed out everything he went through made him the amazing person that he was at that very moment. And hearing and seeing his mother in her state of tears and sobbing, and the words that she was telling him, and the son broke into tears. And both of them hugged each other as they cried. The son came to understand that he had held on to resentment based on his sole point of view, without ever realizing his mother's perspective of the same situation. She was scared for the road he was choosing back then, and searching for ways to change his path. And here they were in the present moment, where she was proud of the decisions he was making. She was proud watching him fight his way back, and that pride, openly displayed and colliding with the hurt he felt, had the power to soothe his wounds and heal them over time. In that moment, they hugged it out, and the son now understood that instead of having resentment and shame, he needed to be proud of all he went through. He soon came to realize that life is not a race, and what started as a fight and a flashback to a painful moment in life that lived as a disgrace for him was turned into love, affection, and honesty that made a son grow even more as a person. The relationship between mother and child is forged during pregnancy and solidified upon birth. Using natural ways, one cannot choose the other. Nature happens. And as each matures, the relationship changes and goes through phases that will create separation or bonding. Depending on how each treasures the other, there will be a spoken or unspoken choice to forge a kind, loving, and supportive relationship that takes the child, the son in this case, into adulthood. Doing that means creating a safe space for each to be honest and transparent when communicating with each other, and not shying away from the robust discussions that will and could sometimes be needed. Now, in this situation, had the mother not reached out, and had the son not responded, and unnecessary resentment would have been left to fester and grow. And that would have been the tragedy. So pause for a minute and think about that. Whether your familiarity with this type of story is with a son or with a daughter, or the parental figure is the mother or the father or both, it doesn't matter. These types of conflicts occur in all families. How we deal with it, how we get through it, how we get beyond it is the critical piece. So in this story, we get to look and reflect on some of the situations and circumstances we find ourselves in right now. What circumstances are you going through now that is a parental child issue? What will it take to get beyond that issue? What will it take for both parties to come together and communicate? And when it comes to communication, it requires a minimum of 2 people. Communication does not occur when only one is speaking and the other isn't listening. That's not communication. And the mother in this story recognized that communication could never occur with her son taking the decision to shut down, which is why she left the room. And while the son's feelings were valid, what we saw in this story, that they're valid within the context of how we see the circumstance. And what we come to understand is that the other person in a story may not see things the same way. They have their own perspective, which is why you have that saying, there's always 2 sides to any story. And this is especially important because at this time of year, as we move through the love month, we need to remind ourselves that love can heal anything, and it can bridge gaps. I also want to point out that as we go through this month that is representing the history of a societal group that has been disadvantaged on so many levels, that we come to think also of stories that impact that aspect of our perspective, and that there may be 2 sides again, even in those types of stories. For me, I recall the survival mode where a less than optimal school system placed my own son in from age 6 to 14. And I can assure you it was love that helped him to endure bullying, systemic oppression, racial biases, and identity castration. It was love that helped him overcome high-risk categorizations. It was love that helped him avoid Ritalin-induced states. So indeed, yes, love can heal and overcome so much. Let's not underestimate the power of love. And in this love month, let us remember and rejoice in it. And I did a stream where I called it that love is more than just a month. Love extends throughout the year. And my 3 words are lead with love. I keep saying that, lead with love. Because when you can overcome situations as outlined in this story. You can overcome so many situations when you come at things from a point of love. So in this podcast, much like a fable, the point of the story, the point of this episode is to avert tragedies in and around you, in and internal and external to your family. Avert tragedy on the basis of love. And on that note, I thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Rays of Living. And please be sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You will also find in the description below my email address should you want to reach out, and I am happy if you do. And just to be sure, it's jen@youareworthmore.co, and worth more you definitely are. And lastly, also see the link that will allow you to schedule a meet and greet with me. And that's an opportunity for me to meet you and you to meet me, and for us to have a chat. And that would be wonderful and welcoming. So please hit the link and let's set up a meet and greet.